Hello, everybody. I appreciate to be here. So my name is Nikolai Ryzhikov. I want to ask you some questions. Who is the first time on FHIR DevDays? Who is the first time on FHIR event? Yeah, okay. Who has a legacy? Some kind of legacy system. Who is looking into some ways to introduce FHIR into this FHIR legacy system? Yeah, and I have a question. Why? Why you want to use FHIR for your legacy system? Again,
directly for the patients, for the citizens.
To provide services for the patient. Yeah.
Interoperability, actually.
Yeah, to have interoperability. Who is really satisfied with the state of his legacy system? Wow, not so much. Okay, so that's the pattern which I see. So people successfully created some solution, and then they start looking how to make it better. So the solution is successful, the system is successful, it's working, but they are not satisfied. So they start looking how to make it properly, how to make it right, and some of them find the FHIR and believe FHIR can help, and it's true, FHIR can help. Another pattern I see, if it's big organization, it has many different applications, they have a mess, and they're looking for the way to standardize, unify all this communication, and they as well hoping that FHIR can help, and FHIR can help. So this presentation, it's some tips and tricks, some advices and practical steps which you can do while you're gonna transform and refactor your legacy system to what I call FHIR architecture or FHIR-first system. Yes, it's the other end. I'm a CTO and co-founder the Health Samurai company. It's a small FHIR company. We are crafting the FHIR backend, not just FHIR server, but the FHIR backend, which is intended to be back for real-world application like EHRs, I don't know, some telemedicine startups, care coordination platforms. So you can find me on Twitter or GitHub. Okay, so that's our agenda. And we will try to answer how to transform to FHIR, mostly, yeah? Because why? Maybe Graham do it better. So they're the 3 steps of transformation I would like to propose to you. So you can start from the FHIR facade, then probably move to the FHIR server, and then probably move to the FHIR backend, to the FHIR-first application. So the first theoretical step which you can do, so it's so when you start working with the FHIR, the main value of the FHIR is a mature and good information model. Yes, that's what you're looking for. If you, I don't know, I've seen a lot of enterprise systems. If you go inside, you see the mess with the naming and all this stuff. And what's good FHIR can bring to you, what the major value of FHIR, it gives you solid and mature informational model. So, and the first step you can do, you can just sit down and try to map your internal model, like tables, entities, objects, and classes, to FHIR resources, and then attributes and columns one by one to FHIR elements. So we call it, it's like translating to the language. Yes, the FHIR is a dictionary. So, and then you have to translate your legacy code to the FHIR. So, and you can do it just in an Excel file or maybe in a text file. So, I would recommend to bring some FHIR expert, at least to bootstrap this process, so which can help you to start with the FHIR. But usually you go to the FHIR documentation, you read the summary, and then you start looking the right resource. Sometimes you find one or more, and at that moment I encourage you to go to the FHIR chat and ask the questions, because this is another power and value of FHIR community. The FHIR community will answer you because you are not alone at this process. And as experience show, usually like 80-20 rule working. So, and 80% of your data of your model, internal model, will be successfully mapped to the FHIR. And you will have this 20% which you have to fix, and sometimes there is no place to put information which you have extensions. Extensions are quite a risky stuff, so please go to FHIR chat and consult about this extension. Sometimes there's multiple ways to do the same stuff in FHIR, and they will really in detail, so go and discuss this. So the FHIR, not a silver bullet, yes, you never get one-to-one, But I think with FHIR it will be better than you doing it internally. Yeah, sometimes maybe you are working on some new domain which is not covered by FHIR, so then you can initiate the new working group in FHIR, and I've seen this really happening in a couple of years, like laboratory guys come to FHIR and build this domain inside the FHIR very well. Okay, so this is translation. This is first step you can do. You can do it right now. You know, just today sit down and try to map it to the FHIR, and you will get the value from that. Yeah, and be interop and communicate with the community. This is really essential. So the next practical step, which is not yet really transforming to the FHIR, but you can start refactoring. If you have a control on your system, you can start refactoring your system to be FHIR-like. I usually call it FHIR inspired. So you can go and rename some tables, rename some strange name for your columns, and make your system FHIR-like. So this is safe steps. This is like a refactoring. Yes, and you will start aligning your model with the FHIR model. It's kind of easy, yes? No. So maybe it's the wrong place. Yeah, let's say. So the next real step, usually you want to provide some FHIR API. I don't know, for some external clients, for new application, for patients. And at that moment, the good first step is create the FHIR facade. So the idea that inside you have your legacy system, and you start building the FHIR facade. It's easy to build FHIR facade if it's just read-only, and I recommend you start from read-only stuff. So you just implement some get resources and search resources with a very limited set of search parameters. So at that moment, yeah, it's kind of easy to implement. So you create a new REST endpoint. You transform it to query to your legacy database. Then you get the data and transform it to the FHIR format and send it back. So you can do it in a day, yes, in a week. There's some tooling like Wonk Facade, but you can do it internally. It's not big deal. My recommendation, so when you come to this point, try to look into some declarative DSLs to do this transformation. I mean your legacy model to FHIR model. So there is a FHIR mapping language, which is Rising. Yes, so we have a Jude, which is templating data YAML-based mapping, but don't hesitate to invent your own. So make it declarative, so probably your business analyst can turn your logical mapping into the DSL, and then this DSL will work. So here is like one sample from open source project, which is transforming US NPI to FHIR server. So it's open source. You can find it in our GitHub and see there's a small internal DSL which helps to map it, and the idea that not programmers can do this mapping. So try this way when you start working on facade. So okay, so that's good about facade. It's easy to start. You bring the first value because you're starting serving the FHIR, so other systems can integrate with you, some new application. But when you go deeper and when you want to implement the half, at least, of specification of FHIR, some rev includes, chained params, and blah, blah, blah. So it's getting more and more complicated. And yeah, because you're trying to implement the whole FHIR specification is a big deal. So, and your task is even more complicated because you have to do all of this translation at the same time. So, and here coming the, yeah, you're translating the query into internal model, and sometimes it's becoming too complicated. So you can move forward to the step 2 and try to introduce the FHIR server. The general idea, so you can make your own and take some open source and buy some FHIR server. Then you can split your problem into 2 problems, which you can solve one by one. So the first problem, you have to convert your internal data into FHIR and load it into the FHIR server. And then you can serve the FHIR API by the FHIR server. If you, for example, take existing FHIR server, so you don't have to implement the FHIR API. So you split this complex task into two parts. Yeah, but this part of synchronization with legacy is another challenge. Yes, so we entering into the world of distributed systems and duplication, so we should understand that trade-offs will be everywhere. But still, it can be much more simpler because this synchronization, you're just transforming and loading, and then all the complicated FHIR API on other side. Yeah. So the most challenging part is replicating data from your legacy to the FHIR server. Yes. So because you have to detect the change, if you need some real-time FHIR API, so you have to somehow detect changes on your legacy system and replicate these changes to the FHIR server. And so if you have a control on the code base, so potentially go into all the places when you create, update, or delete resources and create some kind of event sourcing so you can write into some queue all of these events. And then some service can read these events and populate the FHIR server. So if you're lucky and your system already supports some kind of event sourcing, so just do it. So if you don't have a control on the application layer, on the service layer, so probably you can go to the database. Yes, that's how usually people do it. So the simplest solution, you can start polling for the changes to your database. So if you have timestamps in tables, you can remember the timestamp you poll it last time, and then try to get the new records from it. Yes. So let's say we have a patient table. When patient updated, we have like updated at column, and then we poll now, get like 3 patients. Remember this updated at, and next query is saying give me all patients which was updated or created after this timestamp. So you're getting these changes and sending it to the FHIR server. Yeah, it's a tricky stuff. The most tricky stuff if you delete rows in your tables. So the question is how you're going to detect these deletions. Yes, because you could not poll for the deletions. So it can be a problem. So somebody can be lucky so the database by themselves can provide this feed of changes. For example, in PostgreSQL, you have a logical replication. So, and you can subscribe to all the changes in a database, listen, filter it, and replicate. So I know something like this in MongoDB and blah, blah, blah. So probably you can go down. So another simple solution, if your database support like something like triggers, so you can insert the triggers when somebody insert, delete, or update record in a patient table. So it will populate some queue table. So the service which is replicating data to the FHIR server can work. Yeah, but you should understand, for now, it's already distributed system. You're duplicating data. So if you run the huge migration on your legacy system, you have to go and migrate the FHIR server as well, or re-import and export all the data, yes? So at that moment, so we're still speaking about read-only interface. Yes, we're just sending data to the FHIR server serve it. For some application, at some point in time, if you start writing real application on top of this FHIR API, the developers come and say, please provide us write interface. We want to store some data into your FHIR server, and you will have a problem at that moment with the FHIR facade, with the FHIR server, because now you have to replicate backward. So the good news, that's usually how you do the refactoring. So you're starting some new features, new services as a FHIR. Yes, you keep the old one as is, and then you're just starting new. And these new services probably don't need to communicate back all the changes to your legacy system, only maybe a very small piece, yes? And other stuff can be stored in your FHIR server. So don't think you have to send back all the data. Probably you don't need to do this. So you can keep the new data in the FHIR format on a FHIR server and just send some stuff back to your legacy system. Here comes a FHIR subscription API. So if it's kind of simple, so you can write the service, and if your FHIR server supports the subscriptions, so you can subscribe for some changes and create this back replication. But if you go this way, you still have 2 masters, a multi-master system, which is usually is a very complicated system. Yeah, and here is how you can. This is working schema or approach how you can refactor your system. So you already have a legacy system, you have a FHIR server, you have some old components which is working with a legacy, and you start writing the new components if you like it. So you can start moving one by one from here to here. It's a long process, but it's safe. It can live for years. So when we really did such of transformation, it can take the years, but it's a safe way. So another way, just revolutionary way, you're just writing from scratch the new version. Okay, but you will make the half of mistakes you did in the first version. So, so the Graham is talking about the shallow and the deep interoperability. The shallow means when you create this like something like FHIR facet for some external integration and somebody use it, yes? So it, I don't know if you ever interacted with the Epic FHIR API or other system which just created the FHIR API for other people, not for themselves. Yeah, it's working somehow. Yes, so to make it work, and what Graham called the deep interoperability, if you really start using the FHIR API by yourself and bring the FHIR inside your system, so this is like a deep interoperability because your system interoperable by design, so internally. It speaks the same language. Yeah, so the ultimate goal which we can move is just to build FHIR-first applications, or FHIR native applications. Yeah, and it's a bleeding edge of FHIR. So not so many systems built, but what we are trying to do, we're really building this system for like 4 years, and it really works. There is a lot of new challenges you will be faced, which are the questions which are not yet solved, even not yet raised in the FHIR community. How to provide access control, granular, which is really enough to have a FHIR backend and user interfaces. Yes, so you don't need any middleware between, because in real systems this access control can be kind of complicated. So for example, in Tbox we created like a policy-based access control, which can simulate the role-based, but as well go to the attribute-based access control. Another features you will probably miss when you go to the FHIR-first approach. So where to put the business logic? Yes, the FHIR defined the create, update, delete operations, and now we have more complicated operations like booking something and blah blah blah, ordering. So where should I put this code for this business logic? So one way we, for example, solving this problem is providing the ability to extend the FHIR server with a custom operation and put this logic into this custom operation. So as well, we created a special protocol so you can write the plugin to our FHIR server and implement this custom operation on your side, and then register this operation on a FHIR server, and all other stuff will work, like even transactions. So at some point in time, you will find that the FHIR search is not enough for you. When you start building like complicated patient lists, some dashboards, you will find that, oh, the FHIR search doesn't work that way. So, and another very promising stuff which we are forcing like for 3 years, it's a SQL on FHIR, which is much more flexible than FHIR search. So if you have a SQL on FHIR and you can define your own custom queries and custom parameters, so it can resolve these issues. And we really were able to do this. So the maybe last word, so we're trying to make our FHIR server, which is called Tbox. We call it FHIR backend, not just FHIR server, because we design it to be real backend for real applications. So if you have questions about this FHIR-first way and what challenges you will face, so you're welcome. You can try Tbox, or you can go to read documentation and see how we solve these challenges and just do the same in your code base. So the ideas are open, so borrow. So I think that's all. I'm open to answer your questions. Thank you. It's too fast, yeah? Too fast. So. I can tell details, yeah, if you really would like to hear. Yeah.
Regarding the second approach and the way, so you said it's safe to deal with so the legacy layer and FHIR server at the same time, but you always have here merge problems, so you have to, and where there is a merge, there is also a chance to make a mistake actually. So you have to deal with probably timestamps on the legacy side, on the FHIR server side, of the change, I mean, for instance.
Yeah.
It's changed at the same time, so it's not a real-time system. It's really, let's say...
Yeah, all of this problem can be very complicated. So again,
I say it's
yeah.
saying that it is safe.
I mean safe that you should not do it at once, yes? So, BAM and I have a FHIR server. You can move this old component here, the old component and the new component which doing the same can coexist. You can test it, switch back. So the idea that you can start doing this migration process piece by piece. Yeah. So I mean you can do the small steps and then stabilize the steps. And you can even stop here if you're a fan of something like microservice architecture. So you can imagine, and you are refactoring your legacy into multiple services. Yes, so you can imagine the huge system where the FHIR server is just one component of this system.
So how did you try to solve the problem regarding building dashboards and so on? It's called FHIR.
Yeah, the simple solution, for example, so the SQL on FHIR, so what we do and guys from Google do, so we provide you direct access to the database with the SQL. So and now you have the whole power like you have in your custom application. So you can write this complicated, sophisticated queries, get all the data. So what we do, for example, we use in Postgres the binary JSON. So we store FHIR resources almost as this. So you need to spend some time to understand how you can make SQL queries with these deeply nested FHIR structures. But when you understand how to do this, so your power is unlimited. So you do the same what you do in a legacy system. So for example, in Tbox, we created ability to write the custom SQL query and turn it into the REST endpoint for other people. So you can easily create these dashboards by writing the SQLs and then turning by configuration it into the REST endpoint. If logic is more complicated, you can write a service which can throw like multiple SQL queries and then build this dashboard.
Okay. And how do you solve the security problems? If you've got a query endpoint, then you might...
Yeah, that's what I'm talking. Yeah, this SQL endpoint is in production, turn it off. The idea that you can play with the SQLs, but then you can turn the SQL into the REST endpoint. So it's not now the SQL inside the server. So you test the SQL, and then you say, I build the patient report SQL query, parameterize it, and then I say I have a new custom operation $patient report, and the UI can query it. Yeah. For more complicated dashboards, if you're really doing some analytics, sometimes you need some downstream databases, like, I don't know, Kafka, or not Kafka, but Vertica, or some time series databases. So for example, we suggest to use Postgres logical replication to send this data to analytical databases like Elasticsearch or Vertica or stuff like this. But yeah, it's usually.
You suggested to replicate data in a period of coexistence of the legacy server with the FHIR server for migrating. But what about if the data is a huge amount? We have millions.
Yes, yeah, I forgot to say that usually if you go this way, you have a first step, which is sometimes you repeat 10 times, which is called initial import. So you have to move initial data from here to here. So if it's not so much data, you can run some job, which we'll do it in a few days, yes, like transforming all the data. So we have some tricks, for example, like in Postgres, you just dump it into the CSV, your data as is. You move it to the Postgres database, and then you generate the FHIR inside the database. And usually it's like one order of magnitude faster, so you can, so for example, like transform millions of records in a minute. So you're migrating, like you're spending like 10 minutes to move these millions of records to the Postgres server through the dump and restore. procedure, and then you transform it to the FHIR resources inside database, which can be really 1 order or 2 order magnitude faster than so. But you have to think about some optimization inside this way. And I would suggest, so people usually think that this initial import is only once process, but in real life you will repeat it like 10 times. So automate this process as well. So we can discuss. We did it many times.
No,
So
our
it
experience of
can be hundreds of
performance is not,
Hmm?
our performance experience is not the same with your experience.
Well, tell us about your performance. Yeah, the common mistake, so you build this pipeline with transformation, and then you want to use this pipeline for initial migration. Yes, that could be a problem. So if it's some slow Node.js or, I don't know, freaky Java, so and you're running this in the memory, you're eating the memory, it can be very slow. So you have to find the optimal way. So like, for example, dumping CSV, loading, so when they see working for you, not some virtual machine and stuff like this. Yeah, it's not so easy to migrate a lot of data, but usually you can find some tricks and make it fast.
How do you manage FHIR versions? ST3, R4, R5, R6. On a legacy system, if you build a facade, so you can easily propose different endpoints and which expose a FHIR version. But on your FHIR server, if you store FHIR resources in a specific FHIR version,
Yeah.
how do you migrate to a per version?
Yeah, so
Makes sense.
yeah, as I know, so the most of FHIR server implementers now working on providing you this multi-version access. So, and it's I would say that it's much more easy to transform the one FHIR version to another than transform your internal model to multiple FHIR versions. So you can handle it the same way. So it's still you still have to transform something on fly or I don't know. So it's the same transformation. And usually when you're starting with a facade, so you're working with the common resources, which are quite stable, and the difference in version is not so critical. Sometimes it's critical, but I think it's really overrated, the problem with the versions. So I would suggest go and see which exactly resource types you're going to use, which elements, and do they really have breaking changes between these versions. So ideally for me to have like one FHIR version. So, but it's the same problem that the answer is that, yeah, transforming the one FHIR version to another can be much more simpler than. And the vendors of FHIR server working on this process. So ask your vendor to support this multi-version stuff. Yeah.
You were mentioning SQL on FHIR. You are using this specification and Google.
Yeah, we crafted together this specification. I don't believe it can be like a standard, because as you know, for the SQL, yes, so we have a standard SQL, but we still have a PostgreSQL, we still have an Oracle SQL, and I don't know, BigQuery SQL. They usually support like 80% of standard, yes, and 20% which is vendor specific. So, and
Can you say something about where we can find this specification and in what way are you storing? How does your database schema look?
Mm-hmm.
Using this specification.
So it's the specification, like we can call it like a white paper on GitHub, FHIR, SQL on FHIR. So the general idea that you store FHIR resources almost as is in a database. The idea that your database can supporting ability to store this deeply nested structure. So you not flatten it into the tables because it just doesn't work. I already told in my previous presentation in Redmond about this. So you store it as is. For example, Postgres, even Oracle and MySQL now support the JSON. So this is one way. The guys from Google transform it to the protobuf and load into the BigQuery, which support this protobuf nested structures. And the idea that you can write the SQL on these nested data structures. Usually the schema is quite simple. So for example, for the Postgres, you have one column which is with type JSONB, and you just store a FHIR resource as is. So if we go into the details, so we like doing some transformation, isomorphic transformation on FHIR JSON representation to make it a little bit more database friendly. So for example, we are parsing the reference. We're splitting it into the resource type and ID because you're going to join by this field. Yes, you don't want to split again and again. So we, for example, we and Google guys doing the first class extensions. So we're moving from extension to the like a first class elements. So it's much more easy to write SQL queries on it and index it. And there are a few other fixes for that. So you can read this documentation. There's an analytic on FHIR stream on the Zulip, so you can ask any questions. There we crafted some tutorials so you can go and play with a BigQuery, with a Postgres, and see how it really works. We can go to Tbox. Tbox provides you SQL and register online and play with the SQL and see how it's stored. So when you send the FHIR search query in Tbox, you will see the SQL which is generated for this query. So you can inspect. Yeah.
I saw some schemas yesterday on the Google presentation. And it was like
This is protobuf schema, I think. This is not database schema. So, but it's still schema. Yeah, the problem is that with relational databases, we usually use a table which is flat. And the FHIR is a deeply nested structure. And and so, for example, when we initially designed the FHIR base, which is an open source database for FHIR, we decided to generate flat tables for all the resources, and we got 2,000 tables. And the performance just died on join all of these tables. So this is the same problem like object relational impedance, if you heard about this. And the solution is if your database support ability to store this deeply nested structure, which is a little bit more generic than just a table inside the database, so you can get the best from both worlds, like SQL world and a document databases world.
But I had the impression that they were using like what we call in Oracle user-defined types. They used V-arrays, they used nested tables, object-oriented stuff.
Yes. Initially, this draft was written by a guy from Cerner. So they use SQL on Spark, and this specification is using only standard stuff to define this deeply nested structure, like structure, array, and all this stuff. But for example, we tested it with a Postgres, and Postgres as well support this definition of custom types, but it's like 10 times slower than binary JSON. And I don't know, something like Elasticsearch doesn't support it, yes, or but you can do this as well. Yeah, there is an example for the SQL on Spark for analytic, and this specification is mostly written for the SQL on Spark.
So actually this means that for your suggestion is to have a patient table with just one column containing JSON or JSON label or protobuf. So
Yeah. So I had a talk when I explained why it's why. Yeah, because the FHIR is the FHIR using the approach from domain-driven design. So this FHIR resource is a domain aggregate. It's a deeply nested structure, which is poorly can be simulated by tables, because otherwise you have to join like 20 tables. If you have a milliard of records, you have a problem. So it just doesn't work. So you can think the FHIR resource on a database site like denormalization on steroids. So you just put all the related attributes for this into one table. As well, the FHIR has a kind of open schema, so you have extensions and all this stuff, so which is as well very complicated when you try to create like dynamic columns and all this stuff. It just doesn't work with the RDBMS way. So that's why so I suggest just go with this simple stuff. Yeah, you will lose all these constraint checks on the database, but for now, for example, in Postgres, you potentially can create constraint checks, and say that this JSON should have kind of specific shape. So it would be, yeah, it will give you some warnings if it's wrong. But yeah.
When you talk about legacy system, what do you mean exactly? Everything for FHIR, or there is a
Yeah, usually.
area?
Yeah. I usually mean everything which is not FHIR. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of them, and I don't know. That's why I asked who is ready to show the internals of his system and who is proud of it. And usually, if you go into the even successful system, yes, and see there is a lot of mess because time pressure, because people doing it faster and faster, they don't have time to think. So that
I mean,
even very huge and successful systems, if you go
every
inside,
system
yeah.
that is more than 20 years old, and some parts are very old, some are more recent. For example, is HXDS.
Yeah.
I don't consider HXDS legacy, but what comes before maybe yes. Instead, from the way you talk.
Okay, let's call legacy. It's a system which you want to rewrite.
Okay,
Okay.
that's more clear.
More questions?
Probably not rewrite, but make use of FHIR.
Or at least make use of FHIR. Yeah, but usually, so you have some reason to start using FHIR. Yes. So for what's your reason, for example?
As I said, interoperability.
So you're gonna interop with whom?
With the consumer, with other consumers, with actually other parts of the company also.
So it's kind of
Yeah.
internal interface. Gonna be
Not only.
not
but
only,
also,
yeah.
Let's say, which might be used for in future also for external.
yeah. But usually you start this way, then you understand to support. So you create some simple facet with a few search attributes. Then guys come to you and say, "Oh, we read this documentation. You have to support includes and rev includes." So you start doing this, and then you come to the point when you understand. So if your system will be internally FHIR, you potentially can easily implement these features. But now, if you're doing something like internal translation, you really can do this. It's too complicated. And that moment you start moving to the FHIR side. So it's starting on the surface, but then going inside.
We have institution that works, communicate with software. Do you have experience of backward compatibility of a service FHIR exposed in a whole way? So, because if you have to maintain the communication with, for example, an external institution.
Yeah, I have experience. So some systems, they just support two interfaces. So for example, they have a legacy SOAP interface, and then they start building the new FHIR interfaces, and they start slowly migrating and pushing and deprecating the SOAP to the FHIR. Yeah. Or for example, the Josh now and the guys working on the translating the HL7 v2, which is really very popular, to FHIR subscriptions. So the new system can be written not about the v2, but start using the FHIR to the subscriptions. So
you say that when you start with a facade, which is what many people probably would do, then you kind of progressively get into worse problems trying to...
yes.
Does that mean that you don't really recommend starting that way?
No, it's a reasonable first step. It's a reasonable first step because you will reuse the most of pieces of this work. If you eventually want to migrate to FHIR server architecture, so you already have a mappings and all this stuff. So it's a good first step. So even the first step, I think, is just refactor your system to align to FHIR. Then it will simplify all these mappings. Then the second step is building this facet, play with it, got real requirements. I want to this search parameter, I want to write some stuff, I need transaction endpoint and stuff like this. So then you will be pushed to the FHIR server side. Yeah. So I have a 1 minute, so I think, thank you.